Hey, Blue Rev. It is Dan McCool here. I am the administrator and founder of Blue Revolution. It is good to be with you for another episode of the Blue Rev Show. And today we've got a great show for you. Robyn Donaldson, who is one of the moderators of Blue Revolution and the founder of an organization called Paths to Peace, located in Atlanta, Georgia. Robyn is an incredible political activist, and I'm really excited to have her on. We've been talking for a while, she and I, about doing this, and finally today we're doing it. So I'll say a little bit more about that interview in a minute. First, just a few comments about what's happening in the news. Not everything that's happening in the news, but just a few kind of key stories. And starting with Joe Manchin, who is our least favorite name in the Democratic Party and has dominated most of the postings I've seen coming through in the last few weeks, and that the moderators have seen coming through in Blue Revolution. Joe Manchin stalling again on the Build Back Better plan put forth in Congress, and very frustrating. Joe Manchin citing inflationary concerns. Obviously, as we know, Joe Manchin, senator from West Virginia, a Trump plus 40 state. So not super surprising that he's been a real thorn in the side of the Democratic Party on this process, but still frustrating nonetheless. Going along with what we're going to be talking about later today in the interview, and what we're going to start thinking about a lot more as we close off the year of 2021 and go into 2022, is the fact that we have a number of Senate elections next year. In 2022, and if we win them, we can increase our majority in the Senate. Even though that is historically difficult, it is not logically difficult. It is not concretely difficult. We can do this if we do the work for it. So if you are watching this on Facebook or YouTube or anywhere else where we are streaming this, please go ahead and sign up in the link for volunteering next year. We've got about 350 people signed up so far, little less than a year out from the 2022 elections. We got to elect more Democrats to the Senate, and if we have 52, 53, even 51 Democrats in the Senate, which is certainly possible, we can go tell Joe Manchin to kick rocks. We can say, vote against this if you want. We don't even need your vote, rather than having him hold up legislation like this. So let's start to get activated. Let's start to get going here. Mark Meadows, former chief of staff for former President Donald Trump, was held in contempt. The vote was in the House last night. Only two Republican House members voted for contempt, and this is just one of those events that what I always my instinct always is to kind of step back and just look at this event in the context of the ways in which American politics has radicalized over the last 5+ years since Donald Trump ran and won the presidency in 2016. Mark Meadows, the right-hand man of a president who urged folks to defy the 2020 election results, leading to a violent coup attempt, is not only corrupt, but incompetent. Mark Meadows wrote a book about his private conversations with Donald Trump. He wrote a book about private happenings in the White House, and then all of a sudden, when he's asked to testify, he changes course and says that he's citing executive privilege, even though he already let a lot of this information out. So it kind of doesn't make any sense, other than to say that the Republican Party is completely captured by Trumpism. Trump expressing frustration over Meadows' initial agreement to cooperate with the January 6th Commission is what led him to eventually bow out, and what eventually led to this contempt vote. It's just yet another line in a long series of egregious, unlawful acts by Trump and the folks in his circle that was normalized in 2016 when Trump was elected. So another reason why, even though it's tough, even though we're tired, we do need to fight to elect more Democrats to office. And make sure that we do not let these people take power again, or at least take majority power again in our Congress. So that said, we've got a lot to do, folks, in 2022. We've got a lot to do. We are just kind of getting started now, putting the infrastructure together for this. We're going to be doing postcards, letters, which were very effective in 2020, as I spoke about in a couple episodes ago with the founder of Vote Forward. We're going to be doing texting, phone banking, donations, signing people up to do all kinds of volunteer work. So if you haven't signed up yet, folks, again, please go to that link that is in the description of this video, wherever you are watching it. Speaking of the 2022 elections, I spoke to, again, our moderator, Robyn Donaldson, who is a wonderful human being, political activist in Atlanta. That is what the interview is coming up. Robyn has been a moderator here in Blue Revolution for about a year. We have been speaking for a couple years about her activism in Georgia. She was very central to getting out the vote, both for the presidential campaign and for the Ossoff and Warnock campaigns last year. It's a really interesting conversation with Robyn because we talk about political activism not simply just as affecting results of elections, but as something that we are doing as individuals, as human beings. And being involved in politics is not just about winning. It's about sort of the sense that you get when you're involved, which is a very democratic thing, right? If you are a citizen involving yourself in the political realm, you are doing the work of democracy. These days, it's becoming more and more difficult. It's becoming more and more stressful. Obviously, with the nonstop drip, drip, drip of scandal, misinformation, disinformation, anti-democratic sentiment that is spreading throughout the country, the anti-democratic sentiment which is ossified in the Republican Party, we have to take care of ourselves while we're doing this work. And sort of what I think prompted me to get into some conversations with Robyn around the election time in 2020 was because I, like a lot of folks watching this right now, faced a lot of grueling kind of stress from election seasons, and 2021 has not been an election year, so we've been able to take some time off, but the news itself has been overwhelming, and I don't begrudge anyone for the ways that we reacted to Trump's first election. I think that, as I said a minute ago with the Mark Meadows contempt vote, the election of Donald Trump really did fundamentally change the way that politics is done in the United States for the worse. We have opened the window to a fascist takeover. It's not the first time we've seen it in world history. It's not the first time we've seen it in the last 100 years. And so an overblown response to Trump's election and to Trumpism in general wasn't overblown. We really were sort of reacting to this very dangerous, vicious, anti-democratic man and movement. I think it is worth, after 4 or 5 years of this, kind of stepping back and saying, what are we going to do going forward? Because Trumpism as a force is, sad to say, is here to stay. The infrastructure has been set in place. The permission structure for Trumpism has been set in place. So Robyn and I today talk a lot about kind of self-care. Robyn, as a political activist and as a yoga instructor, and a sort of spiritual leader, I'll say, is committed to nonviolence, self-care, breath work, yoga, and all the things that go with taking care of yourself during these very difficult political times. And so I'm a huge fan of hers. She's someone who influences me a lot. And I hope to be more like her going into 2022. And we will start in Blue Revolution to urge folks more and more who are burnt out, who don't know what to do, who don't know where to turn. We're going to urge folks more and more to start taking care of themselves, because I think that we've seen this in a lot of sort of the comment sections and the posts and so forth, that people are tired, and you can't just have pedal to the metal all day long. So We're not urging anyone to bow out of politics. This is our country. We need to take care of it. We need to see that we, that we do all we can to maintain it and to keep it democratic. But we also do need to balance that with some self-care. And that's what today's interview is about. So I hope everyone enjoys. Please feel free to leave your responses in the comments section. And again, folks, I can't urge enough. If you haven't signed up for a volunteer activity, do go ahead and click on the link that's in the description of this video. And we'd love to have you aboard for 2022. So my interview with Robyn Donaldson. Enjoy. Thank you. Robyn Donaldson, welcome to the Blue Rev Show. Thanks so much for being on.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And just to say a little bit more about Paths to Peace, it's a great organization. Robyn and I have talked about it a lot over the last few years. It's a team of trauma-informed yoga educators who, they're basically sort of teaching people about the importance of nonviolence, the importance of mental health, racial healing, and all the very vital things that are going on in sort of social justice and political work today. Robyn, if you could sort of just tell the folks in Blue Revolution what you do in Paths to Peace and sort of how you connect it to politics, that'd be great.
Thank you. Thanks for highlighting that. So Paths to Peace, we're a group of trauma-informed yoga educators, healing artists, and therapists, some life coaches as well. And we offer trainings and programming to individuals and organizations specializing in racial healing, mental health education, community building, and trauma-informed care. And the reason it's important, specifically in the political and social justice space, is because a lot of people, we'll start with the pandemic. A lot of people globally and definitely in this country have experienced individual and collective trauma, due to the pandemic. And then there's a lot of people who either are from marginalized communities or work in marginalized communities, a lot of times with the social justice and political work. And when you're doing this work, oftentimes you're experiencing secondary trauma or PTSD. And when we talk about trauma, as far as Paths to Peace is concerned, we work from the school of thought and the definition or philosophy of trauma that it's a visceral reaction to your nervous system, where your nervous system either feels safe or threatened. And so that happens in your nervous system way before it gets to your logical brain. So that's why a lot of times, people will do things and they don't know why they did them or why they reacted in that way, but it's a lot of times it's the messages that they're getting from their nervous system, safety or threat. Totally. And so we have built-in mechanisms already within the nervous system, so that are protective mechanisms. So if something happens where your nervous system feels threatened, it will go into that fight, flight, or freeze mode. And so for example, like if you're in your house, late at night, and you're walking around, and then you hear a noise, downstairs or something, and you just, your body, freezes just automatically to take it in. That's freeze, or someone's running down the street chasing you, with a knife, and you take off, and you flee, or again, if something happens where, you have to go into fight mode, those protective mechanisms are important, and it's good to have those, but then you don't want to stay stuck there. And a lot of times, when we've experienced some kind of threat, to ourselves or, to our nervous system, if people don't move that through the body, then it can stay stuck, and people can stay stuck in that flight, fright, or freeze mode. So it's really understanding what your triggers are, understanding, how your nervous system and how your, body and how you react when you experience a threat. When you know that about yourself, then you can start to become more aware, and then you can, take measures to bring your body and bring your nervous system back into rest and digest, which is important, for healing and to prevent disease, because if you don't move that trauma through your body, it can lead to all other ailments and diseases and things like that.
Sure. Yeah. And it's really important work. And it's something that I don't think we talk about enough in the political realm. And, Robyn, you and I talked last year, like right after the election, it was sort of like between the presidential election and the Georgia runoff elections. And like one of the things that I wanted to do in Blue Rev, which is I guess what we're doing right now, is sort of talking about just the impact of those 4 years and what it had on people. I mean, I remember, just from personal experience tonight, the Trump one was like physically upsetting. And I have talked to many people who felt the same way. And I'm sure people listening now and watching now remember that as well. And, in recent years, I've always been really interested in sort of cognitive therapy and psychoanalysis and these sort of traditional types of therapies, which I think kind of privilege the mind over the body, as if there's a strict split between them.
Right.
And I think like the work that you're doing on this front is sort of, it seems anyway, like you're bringing the two together, like the body actually responds to emotions. It's not something that you can simply just conquer with your mind. You need to sort of align your body with, or you need to sort of like acknowledge what's happening with your body. And I think that that's really important. And it sort of leads me to this other question. You're such a sort of prolific political activist and consultant, and you're involved in politics all the time. Like, what is it that you do to maintain your composure when you're in politics? Because whenever I think of those Trump years, and whenever I think of even now when things get upset, I'm not like ashamed of my responses to these things, but I do understand that they do take a toll on the body if you're sort of upset all the time. And I always think about you when I try to like imagine like how one would escape that, or how one would reconcile themselves with it. So how do you just speak to that? How do you deal with that? How do you compose yourself?
I mean, it's so true. We were already experiencing 4 years of trauma, with Donald Trump, and then going right into not just only the election season, but then the pandemic happened, and then George Floyd was murdered, and it's just like one thing after another. And then even now, we are fighting again for all of these things that we voted for, that we're waiting, to see passed. So it's been, and who knows what's around the January 6th, and who knows what else is around the corner. But, really for me, I have learned, and I'm still learning, it's been like a trial and error. Back in 2008, I was on the Obama campaign in Florida, and after that I stayed on. It turned into Organizing for America, but then it was under the DNC. It wasn't Obama for America anymore. So it did kind of change a little bit the culture, because we were under the DNC umbrella, and we were working so hard on lobbying to get healthcare passed at that time. So this was around like 2010. I think it was after healthcare was finally passed, and I was just completely burnt out. In between the 2008 campaign and then healthcare, I had done my first yoga teacher training, and learned all these great techniques. And then I would go back and work on these campaigns, and it was like I would like compartmentalize the two. I would have my yoga life, and then I'd have my political life. And I did this for about 3 different cycles of various campaigns. And each time it's like I would just get burnt out all over again. And I'm like, why? Because for some reason I couldn't stop and just be still and go back into my yoga, mode during these campaigns. So finally, I think after so much, trial and burn and crashing and things like that, I finally figured out a way to, sort of integrate the two. But it's even hard, for me, sometimes. And that's why, it's so important to understand what's happening with your nervous system, because sometimes you do need to down-regulate it. And then sometimes you need to up-regulate it if you, need energy, or you need to be more alert, and things like that. But I would say definitely just breathing, just learning how to take deeper breaths, inhaling, exhaling through your nose. That's how I'll just say you're supposed to inhale through your nose and fill your stomach up like a balloon and draw your breath up to the chest. And then you're supposed to exhale through your nose and pull your navel back towards your spine as you exhale. And that gives you, those are the you can take the deepest breaths there. And that's how we come out breathing when we're babies coming onto this earth. And but usually something happens where it might be like the first startling noise, or something happens, when you first, are an infant, and sometimes people's breathing will reverse. So if people can, stop and check in now, when you're inhaling, are you filling up your stomach, inhaling, bringing the breath up, or are you doing it the opposite? And so just deep breaths, and that has been shown. There's been studies over the last decade. A man named Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, he wrote a book called The Body Keeps Score, and he did a decade-long study. It just wrapped, I think, in 2020, and it's showing now that deep breaths and yoga and healing arts that helps to move trauma through your body, and it activates the vagus nerve, and through your breath work and through movement. And so I would highly suggest just people even just starting with just taking time to take a few deep breaths. I mean, just even starting there, allowing yourself to take naps, and even if you don't go into any, kind of deep sleep, just allowing yourself to rest, and finding, things that you like to do, making time for that, of course, drinking water. But just doing anything that's going to nurture you is so important in this space.
It's really vital. And I love that idea of the body keeps score. I've been thinking about that for quite a while now. I always said it was like my journal that kept score, my brain that kept score. And that's, somewhat true sometimes, but it really does come through in sort of like aches and pains and sort of the heaviness of it all. And, I do, it's tough. I mean, because I think in any good democracy, any sort of organic democracy, folks should be sort of out acting in public and sort of arguing for what they believe in, fighting for the laws that they want passed, fighting for sort of the political culture that they believe in, and so forth. But there's so many barriers to that sort of just pound down on your body as you try to get out there. And you talked about sort of, as at a young age, you can sort of face some sort of trauma or something just simply startling, and it sort of messes with your breathing, right? And I'll sort of notice that. I mean, I'll be reading a story about, God, I don't even want to say their names, but the notorious right-wing people who are, the performance artists who are making the news every day these days. And I'll just notice that the breathing does change. A couple of years ago, I wrote this book about totalitarianism, and it was a lot of the work that I did in my grad work. Mm-hmm. And it was largely about how sort of fascism, sort of anti-democratic movements, comes largely from disorientation, the way in which people feel disoriented.
Wow, that's deep.
Yeah, and they crave anchoring, and they crave truth, and they crave a sense of placement. And I think, like, if we're placing ourselves, we're not going to get spun out into this disorienting place of loneliness and sort of seeking solid answers and so forth. And I think that, but it's hard work, right? I'm trying to get my body more involved in the way that I deal with stress, right? Mm-hmm. Not just my prefrontal cortex, but the deeper stuff, the stuff, and I love the way that you speak to that.
Yes, and I love that it's about the disorientation, because it definitely is. A lot of times this work is so intellectual or mental, and it's up in the ideas and strategy and this and that. And it's interesting because, when you say disorienting, I'm thinking, grounding, like people need to be grounded, and then also grounded in the sense of the grassroots and what's happening on the ground. And, right before, the show, Dan and I were, kind of talking, and I was saying that, well, two things. One, yoga and yoga philosophy and these practices are what Mahatma Gandhi used in India to overthrow the British. And then, at that time, Dr. King had been studying, some of Gandhi's work and what they were doing in India. And that inspired the nonviolence civil rights movement here in the United States. And, coming from, based in Atlanta. And so, these practices, it's real, as far as the transformative power, of them. And, we can't keep running races in the same way because things are changing, in this country. And so I just really feel, and I've been telling some of my clients and various, organizations who are, on the front lines with voting rights and, organizing, that, we have to figure out a way to win and to fight, from a spiritual internal level. It can't just be, about logic and strategy, and things like that. And like Fannie Lou Hamer, famous Black woman organizer from Mississippi, she was working as a sharecropper on a plantation that I think maybe her either mother or grandmother had been a slave on the plantation, and they still work there. And I actually met the man who recruited her, a man named Charles Mclaren. He's still living. He lives in Mississippi, and he was part of like the original, voting rights movement there in Mississippi. And he was from Jackson, Mississippi, and he went to the Mississippi Delta, and he was supposed to be registering people to vote. And, at that time, it was very, a lot of Black people were being lynched and killed and everything. And so people were really in that area, they weren't really trusting, and he's another Black man as well. And he thought, he said, because he was from Jackson, Mississippi, he thought he could come in and, register all these voters. And so he, just like organizer, he needed an end to the community. And he ended up meeting Fannie Lou Hamer, and then he recruited her, and brought her, to, train her on voter registration and all of this. And then, she just, took off and was able to create all of this change down in the Mississippi Delta. And so she would say, we're not fighting people, we're fighting principalities, So I know for me, like Stacey Abrams and others, but she always talks about, we're actually making progress, which is why we see such a blowback, because, the demographics are changing, the numbers are changing, young people, it's, so that's why we're seeing this push for them, the people, on the right, especially, like, to maintain that power. When you look at the states, like the future of the Democrats it's really in the Sun Belt, Texas, Arizona, Georgia. Definitely those three states are trending younger, and they're becoming more diverse, more, Black and brown people. Even here in Georgia, like the New Georgia Project, they have a specific demographic that they focus on, and like single people or childless people, that's even its own voting block, and demographic. So it's really changing. And because when you look at the Midwestern states, they're kind of, starting to trend older and whiter. And so when you look at the Democratic Party and where the future is headed, it's really in the South and the Sun Belt. And then again, people are moving from, up north. I'm from the Chicagoland area, from the Chicago suburbs. And then, I moved here 8 years ago to Georgia. So, the demographics and everything is like, we have the numbers in Georgia to be able to elect Stacey Abrams. And we had some of those numbers too in 2018, but, again, abuse of power. And that's what we're seeing, now the Republicans are trying to take over these school boards and the election boards, and, trying to put their people in place so they can overturn these elections, because they don't have any ideas. They don't have the numbers in the same way in many of these places. So this is what they're resorting to, is abuse of power and violence.
Right. In terms of like my readings of some of the people that you mentioned, Gandhi and Martin Luther King and so forth. Like it's just, it's a very difficult thing to fight for your beliefs and not get tangled up in the race to the bottom with people.
It is.
That's the thing that I find the most difficult. And I think with Trump, and we're fighting Trumpism now, right? We're not just fighting Trump, but the sort of the whole constellation of Trumpism. And he's such a big personality, and a lot of these other right-wing figures are such big personalities. It's very difficult not to see them as the target, right? Rather than sort of what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I guess it's just like our job is like that much harder, right? I mean, like if you're a proponent of sort of right-wing politicians and right-wing programs, you just latch yourself onto the leaders and you are gleeful in the leaders' bullying tactics and so forth. And for us, it's like we can't, I don't see a lot in Blue Revolution or elsewhere and on the sort of the online progressive world. I don't see a lot of like fawning or adulation for people like Joe Biden, in the same way that we necessarily see it on the other side.
I was going to say too, the thing with Trump is so there's something called the lizard brain. And it just goes to survival and fear. And Trump knows how to tap into the lizard brain. And so he knows, Trump is, he's a very interesting figure because he, a lot of times, yes, he can be definitely stupid or, come off that way. But then he's also, I feel like, very smart, in some ways too, in regards to, I feel like, human nature, in some ways, or at least in tapping into the people that he's trying to attract. And he knows how to, say certain buzzwords or dog whistles and really tap into, people's fear about like the other or, whatever. And it's not even just, limited to just, white people or anything like that. I mean, I have a family, friend, relative who is a young Black man, and he is a Trumper, and he, supports, everything. And, it's just wild, for me to watch, and see this.
Yeah.
And so that's again why it's so important to, just become aware of your nervous system and what's going on, because he knows how to speak to people's, fears and fears of, survival. And he knows how to tap into that very well.
It's tricky because based on everything that we've been talking about, based on things that Democrats and progressives have been talking about ever since the 2020 election, we are also fighting for survival as well, which is, it's complicated because, like, on the one hand, we're like, okay, so survival is it's this kind of nefarious, almost murky tool that sort of fascistic people will tap into when they want to motivate people. But the truth is that we kind of also have to tap into it a little bit. And I was just sort of like thinking as you were talking about sort of voter suppression, and how we need to try to get these sort of voting rights bills passed and all the rest. And hopefully over the next year or so, we can find a way to do that. But, voting rights, like the idea of sort of universal voting rights, where sort of there's free and fair elections, everyone's, pretty much able to vote. It's a really relatively new thing in, sort of American history, the founding, right? It's like, obviously, it's pretty common knowledge that, very few people were able to vote at the founding of this country. There was an evolution, right? 1830s was sort of like more universal voting for white males, unpropertied. And then like, obviously you get the 19th Amendment for women. And then of course you got the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. And that's really the moment when we actually sort of began the democracy, was kind of like our parents' lifetimes. And it's like, voting rights are kind of the exception to the rule when you look at American history. And I think that there's like a lot of acknowledgement to that lately. I think the way that we think about American history has changed in recent years for the better. I think we've taken a more honest look at this. But in my mind, the voting rights that we have and that we took for granted, or that we took for granted, let's say 15, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, sort of like in our more immediate lifetimes, like that was something that needed to be maintained through activism. That was not something, that was given by the powers that be. The work that you're doing, Robyn, is just so vital, I think. And I think just, if we're not going to go the route of, activating people's lizard brains all day long, as the other side does, it is like so vital that progressives and Democrats and folks on our side of the aisle like understand how much rest and sort of restorative personal care is required to really do this work. And I hope that the work that you're doing down there can sort of spread and become a little bit more mainstream in terms of just like how activists are taking care of themselves. Because I think sometimes, and this is not super common, but I think that sometimes what happens is there's a little bit of a race to the bottom among activists of just like, okay, well, I have done this much work, how much work have you done? And I don't see many people actually like say this out loud, but I think sometimes there's a sense of I am just completely crushing my body to get people elected, and you're not doing it. So, and it's like it just becomes this like really tenuous situation. So I think that the work you're doing is so valuable on that, just to like allow people rest, allow people to sort of like get back in touch with themselves in a way. So
yes, because a lot of times when you don't do that, you end up like, for instance, if you maybe have to come up with some creative ideas or brainstorm and things like that, if your nervous system is like on high alert, it blocks that creativity from coming in, and it kind of blocks your imagination and things like that. But then when you can make space in your nervous system, you'd be surprised at how much that opens up. So then you can take in more information and have more energy and things like that. And I definitely feel like one thing I did want to mention is that it's so important to understand misinformation and disinformation. That's what's fueling everything that we're seeing, happening. And if you are an activist, or especially if you're a moderator or you have these Facebook groups, or just if you're on social media, it's so important that you start to kind of understand a little bit more about misinformation and disinformation and what that looks like, because it doesn't take a lot of people, and all it takes is a seed that has to be planted. And then a lot of times, we'll end up doing the work for the nefarious, character that's putting the misinformation out. So we just have to really be careful and double check things and make sure that, we're not end up doing the work of,
right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think that a lot of the right-wing propaganda can trickle down even into non-right-wing circles sometimes. And so that's one of the things that I've seen shifting in recent years, like since Trump was elected, or I guess like during the 2016 election, especially, was like the role of get out the vote activists was turning, not just motivating people to go vote, but actually clarifying voting rules for folks. Because I think, and that's always been true in American history, there's always been flyers put in, neighborhoods about, Democrats vote on Wednesday, Republicans vote on Wednesday. Like that stuff has always been out there. But it's really sort of been, it's been on steroids the last few years. We can only battle it around the edges sometimes, but even that can make a difference, especially in races that are decided by 10,000 votes, and so certainly we want to do that. So Robyn, I know we got to wrap up here. Is there anything else you'd like to share with Blue Revolution? Any place they should go to sort of check out the work that you're doing, or anything that you'd like to leave us with?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm going to be two things. I'll be offering monthly, I guess, I don't know what the name will be, but it'll be monthly yoga and wellness sessions, specifically around for people in the political and social justice space. So if you're interested in that in 2022, you can either go to my website, pathspeace.com, pathspeace.com, or you can just shoot me an email. My email is hello, HELLO, at pathspeace.com, PATHS. So either one, email or visit my website. And then eventually I'll be offering a certified yoga teacher training. Maybe it might either be later on the summer of 2022, or it might start in 2023, but it will be a teacher training that'll be, mostly in the virtual space, maybe in person, but so I'm happy to, talk with people about, what that looks like, but I definitely want to offer some kind of monthly sessions specifically for people in that political or social justice space. So again, you can email me or go to my website, pathspeace.com.
Great. And Robyn will be, she's posting in Blue Rev periodically because she is a moderator of the group. So sometimes you will see references to this, and that's great. So pathspeace.com, and let's get ourselves oriented before we do this political work. Let's make sure that we're taking care of ourselves at the same time, not just.
It's essential to the work. Absolutely.
For sure. Robyn Donaldson, I want to thank you so very much for being on the Blue Rev Show. It's a real pleasure having you here.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. And I hope we get to meet in person maybe in 2022. That'd be cool.
That would be great. Yeah. Last year we sort of tried but COVID threw that off. So
yeah.
Thank you so much, Robyn.
All right. Take care. Thank you.